Shalom. First and foremost, I want to start by giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham, Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who rule well and teach well, and peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, pushing His word with all truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Shalom, shalom. This your brother Corner Wath with the Great Millstone Charlotte Camp, coming with another quick lesson to the Spirit and Power of Yahweh Yahweh Shai. And in this one, I just want to touch on the article we went into on camp this past Saturday, and just how what we're seeing is leading to the coming famine of the word, man. Right? It's coming sooner than sooner than people believe, man. And Trump is being or taking right that mantle of judge, jury, and executioner. Right? If this thing does indeed, you know, uh, uh, become a fact, you know, uh, as we read in this BBC article. It reads, Trump administration considers suspending habeas corpus. Right, as we touched into, right, it's pretty much the law that gives people due process, right? And with the suspension of that, with the potential suspension rather, uh, that would lead to the famine of the word, man, because now they can persecute you, without restraint, you know. So as brothers have been going into, and the persecution is gonna intensify, right? All these things are about to be uh, ramped up, as we reach these final days. And then putting things in order like this are just adding fuel to the fire. Now, reading this article, it reads Donald Trump's administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus, the right of a person's to challenge their detention in court. One of the U.S. president's top aides has said, right? So any dissenting messages, right, that don't go with the status quo, you know, that the country wants you to push, and ultimately that these elites, right, want pushed out here. You know, you can be jailed, and you have no recourse to fight your imprisonment. You know, it says. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, told reporters on Friday that the U.S. Constitution allowed for the legal liberty to suspend in times of rebellion or invasion, right? So as they bring in that problem reaction solution, you know, the the talks of civil war and the uproars of the people continue to intensify, right? They're going to be able to push things like this into the into Congress, right? They're going to allow these things to take place and become law. It says, and the scriptures talk about he that frameth mischief by law, because they put these things in action, right, with nefarious intent behind them, man. You know, and their ultimate target is who? The elect, right? Well, and they're targeting the prophets, uh, the message of Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai, right, through these different legislations, man. It reads. His comments come as judges have sought to challenge some recent detentions made by the Trump administration in an effort to combat illegal immigration, as well as remove dissenting foreign students, right? And it's going to be dissenting opinions, soon come, right? Anybody who disrupts the status quo, right? So anybody who has a mind against this current administration, right? Anybody who has a mind against this NWO system, right? All these Agenda 2030s, right? The movements of the WEF, right? All these groups, um, the things they do out in Davos. So like it, but everything you see, if you're speaking against it, right, and ultimately if you're speaking of Yahweh Shem Shai, right, you're seen as a dissenter, right, and you can be um, like it says, um, where we at? Um, you can be detained, without representation, right? For an indefinite amount of time, right? It says his comments come as judges have sought to challenge some recent detentions made by the Trump administration in an effort to combat illegal immigration, as well as remove dissenting foreign students. A lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. There are several pending civil cases against the Trump administration, deportation of undocumented immigrants based on habeas corpus, Most recently, a federal judge ordered the release of a Turkish university student who had been detained for 6 weeks after writing an article that was critical of Israel, right? And the relationship of America and Israel has been well documented. They're pretty much uh, the protector, right? That guard dog, right, for those Amalekites out there. And like I say, he wrote a article that was critical of those Amalekites out there. So how much more the prophets, right? Who speak on the daily, right, against this place. You know, so if we're being, more critical of them than than they are. So they're gonna be seeking to do what? Detain us, man. For speaking this gospel, right? Hey, so let's get that real quick. Uh, where we at? Mhm. It's Revelation 12, and actually we'll start in 12 and jump down. Revelation 12 and 12. Therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So all these things are taking place quickly, right? Because they know that their time is short. They know they have, but you know, a short time to enact all their policies and to accomplish their goals, man. Right? So now, they have to intensify that coming persecution. It says, jumping down to 17, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of the Most High and have the testimony of Yahweh Shah HaMashiach. Right? So they're coming against the testimony, right, of the elect, of those who believe in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right? That's what this is mainly focused on, right? Now I went into Chat GPT and Salakia. It reads, I asked the question, what would the removal of habeas corpus mean for censorship and freedom of speech? And it says the removal of habeas corpus would have serious consequences for censorship and freedom of speech because it would strip away one of the most important legal protections against government abuse. It says easier political repression. Without habeas corpus, the government could detain people indefinitely without charges or trial, and that's what they're gonna do, man. Soon, right? They're gonna be scooping brothers up. You know, believers are gonna be scooped up. Even people who, even if you have a brief interaction with the Israelites, man, right? You're gonna be deemed as a domestic T, right? An enemy of the state, right? And you're gonna face detention for that, man, right? You'll be jailed, as it reads in Revelation 2 and 10, right? We'll get that real quick. Um, it says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Right. So this is what we're gonna face. You know, if this thing does go through, right? Because there's no guarantee, but we know that these things are in the talks, right, to happen soon. And even if it doesn't happen through that means, there's going to be other means, right, that they're going to accomplish these things, man. Right. So that jailing, through that censorship, or you know, going back to the famine of the word, for what we speak. It says increased censorship, fear of detention could lead to self censorship, as people might avoid speaking freely to protect themselves, man. Right? And that's why the scriptures talk about woe to them that, hold back their sword from blood, you know. And you try to protect yourself, right? And and refuse to teach the correct message. That's what these other camps are gonna find themselves in, right? Those predicaments soon come, because they're trusting in this devil, right? But he doesn't have their best interest at heart either. You know. Now we go to Let me see, because it made the mention of um, the self censorship, right? Because a point of the WEF and their agenda, Slovakia, is civic, uh, what do they call it? Civic participation, right? So pretty much we don't have to read this whole thing, but it just says Agenda 2030, why civic participation is key to meeting UN sustainability targets. Because their main focus is to get the people to police themselves, right? They're going to put these things in order, right? And establish that fear in the minds of the people. And then they're going to do the policing. You know, the though we'll be in a police state, with the EU and the UN troops, right? Boots to ground and things of that nature. We're going to start to see uh, the people are going to start to police the situations, man. People are going to be turning each other in, right? That's why it talks about um, the division of the households, right, in the scriptures, right? Your your brothers, your sisters, your parents, right, your friends, your neighbors, right? They're all going to become your enemies. You know. Let's get that real quick. This is Matthew chapter 10, and we'll start in 34. It reads, think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I come not to send peace but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own house. Right? And they scriptures also talk about how they'll give you over uh, uh, to the judges, man. Right? So this is what you're gonna face, right? And this is what they're seeking to implement, right? So the removal of habeas corpus can lead to this, man, right? It says, it's like it, increased censorship, fear of detention could lead to self-censorship, as people might avoid speaking freely to protect themselves. The collapse of legal safeguards, freedom of speech is protected by law, but without habeas corpus, there is no way to enforce that protection if the government acts unlawfully, right? Now, the other point I wanted to make is Trump being judge, jury, and executioner. And let's get this here first, you know, because this is all leading up to the famine of the word, man. This is Amos 8 and verse 11. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord power, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord, right? Hearing the word of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai on the highways and hedges and on these video epistles, man, right? You know, the suspension of this habeas corpus will lead to that, man. If they do go through with it, right? It says, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord and shall not find it, right? Because they're doing everything in their power to remove, the word of Yahweh Bashim Shai off the earth, And in due time, the Lord is going to remove his men, from the highways and hedges and from, teaching and preaching, man. Because and that's how that those doors of mercy are closed, right? Because you won't be hearing that word anymore, right? You won't have access to these men anymore, right? You need to take advantage of the access you have, you know, while you have that time, man, right? Seek the Lord while he may be found, because there's a time where the Lord will not be found, man, right? The mercy will be closed and it'll only be judgment, right? Now going back, because it spoke of how the government will be acting unlawfully, you know, because the safeguards will be removed. I looked up the phrase judge, jury, and executioner, and this is the AI overview. It reads: the idiom judge, jury, and executioner refers to someone who holds all three powers: the ability to judge, decide on guilt or innocence, and carry out punishment, all without due process or oversight, right? And that's what the removal of habeas corpus is doing, right? It's removing due process and government oversight. They're just going to be able to act, right, according to their own will, you know? It says, it is commonly used when someone is accused of wielding unchecked power or acting unfairly. And, people are, calling this man, uh, King Trump, right? We can see the parallels between him and Nero. Uh, so this is what we're, we're seeing take place in prophecy, man. Right? This man is being set up as that cruel Lord. You know, it says the phrase often suggests a lack of impartiality and potential for abuse of power. Right? So that removal of habeas corpus is opening the floodgates for that to take place. It reads authority. Going back to the Chat GPT, it says authoritarian power. The removal of the removal would shift power heavily toward the state, enabling arbitrary arrest and silencing of opposition, hallmarks of authoritarian regimes. And so who are they trying to silence, man? The prophets, right? They want to stop this message of Yahweh Shema Shah from going forth. That's why when you read let me see here. What is it? Isaiah 24. This is Isaiah 24 and 11. There is a crying for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is gone. But that crying for wine is people crying out, right, to hear the truth, you know, and it's going to be removed, right? It's going to be a time where you're not going to hear this message, right? Going back to that Amos 8 and 11 and 12, man, you know, and that's what, as we read in Revelation 12 and 12 and verse 17, this is what he's seeking to do. The testimony of Yahweh Shai being in the earth, right? They want to completely wipe that away, so passing legislations, getting rid of, different constitutional, things, they're all leading up to, right, that coming famine of the word, right, that coming persecution that we're going to face for our belief, man. And so, like it, Jake getting over his cold. Um, so going back to this, just finishing out, it says, in short, removing habeas corpus would undermine the rule of law and could open the door for widespread censorship and suppression of speech, which would that's pretty much the point, right? So, you know, we already see the digital censorship taking place, right? The digital, what was it? Suppression, right? Taking place, right? With brothers' channels and things of that nature. So then, what's the next recourse? To make it to where you can't say these things, period, right? You reading, what's that? First Maccabees. I think this First Maccabees 6. It might be Second Maccabees 6. Mm. Yep, this is Second Maccabees 6:6. It reads, neither was it lawful for a man to keep the Sabbath days or ancient feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So for you to be an Israelite is going to become, right, the most unpopular thing on earth. Soon come, man. Right? Jake, look at this as a fad now, but when that persecution starts, you know, you're not gonna see Jake running around in their fringes on they all their stuff no more, man. Right, on their t-shirts, and the women walking around with their fringe dresses, and Jake being over righteous and things of that nature, man. Right? It's not gonna be cute to be an Israelite, right? And these are the people that are gonna fold because they weren't establishing that foundation, right? In order to make it through these times, right? To have that faith and that belief in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right? They were more concerned with the outward and then the inward, you know. And when the famine of the word kicks in, right? When the persecution really ramps up, then will we know, right? Who the Lord is dealing with, man, right? Let's see here, because I did want to get this because was I done with that? Yeah, that's pretty much it on that. Yeah, but just going back, Trump is preparing to open the floodgates of that persecution, man. You know, um, that's pretty much it on the article. But we see that that's leading to dissension among the ranks and the as far as the government is concerned as well, because they're speaking on how the Congress are the ones who have the power to suspend these things, not the president. But Trump is taking these things into his own hands, man. Right, going back to him being that that authoritarian, right? That actually, let me get it in Isaiah 19. You know, that harsh ruler, man, the cruel Lord. Because it's not just us. Anybody who speaks against, right, this new world order system, right, is going to be an enemy of the state and be declared, somebody who can face these detentions, man. Right. If you're not all in one accord. Oh, that's what I want to get. I'll read this first. This is Isaiah 19:4. It says, "The Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel Lord, and the fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahushua of hosts." Right? So this is what we're seeing is that cruelty take place, right? Whether or not, they go through with it, right? We already know that that's the mindset that they're in, right? We already know that this is what they're planning on doing, you know? And the cruelty is just going to continue to ramp up, man, you know? But I wanted to get this here because the same thing happened in the time of the Greeks. Uh, what was it? Let's see here. Mm, Let's see here. Yep, there we go. This is First Maccabees chapter 1 and starting in verse 41. It reads, "Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to this whole kingdom that all should be one people," right? And I bring that out because this is the same mindset that these elites have is that they want everybody in one accord, right? They want everybody to be on the same mind, and anybody who speaks contrary to that is looked as an enemy, man, right? And it says, "And everyone should leave his laws." So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. So all these people to avoid falling into, right, going back to the habeas corpus, to avoid falling into the potential of, being thrown into these jails, right, into these concentration camps, into these systems, and not being allowed a way out, right? Uh, they're gonna fold, man, right? They're gonna find themselves to the point where they're bound the knee, to the will of these kings, man, right? And it says, "Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath." So this is what is going to be, forced upon the people, man. Right? Do you really believe? Right? Are you willing to lose it all? For Yahweh Bashim Shai, are you willing to lay your life down? right, for the testimony of Yahweh Shem Shai, right? That's why the scripture talks about they love not their lives unto death. You know, us losing access to things, right? Us losing, or having our family and friends and people of this world come against us, right? This is a part of it, right? And that habeas corpus potentially being suspended, right, is just gonna, hasten these times to come, man. You know, so that's pretty much the point, man. Lord willing, that was edifying through the spirit and power. How about Shemal Shai? I want to close by giving all praises, glory, and honor to you. How about Shemal Shai? By Shema Karkodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who rule well and teach well. And peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, pushing this word with all truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Shalom, shalom. And Kwam Yasharallah and the Bible Ball. Shalom.